Mountains are many places to many people.
We are working to achieve the same goal.
High visitor numbers will lead to an impact on the environment.
Some famous scientists said it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future.
Tau mai ki tēnei te manahuna. Tau mai ki tēnei te aroaro. Ora ki maunga e tuake rā. Hara mai rā. Hara mai rā.
Charlie Douglas, one of our early explorers, describes kakapo so dense in New Zealand that you could shake a tree in the Landsborough and 5 would fall out. So 150 years later, we're trying to restore this travesty of what we did to this magnificent country that Māori were living in harmony with. We determined we're going to win this war. And it's probably one of the most exciting times we've ever seen in conservation as we see the relevance of conservation to New Zealand society. Unlike many other countries, we've protected a third of our country for conservation. That's an area as big as Switzerland and Denmark together. So we're making a remarkable statement on the international stage about how we value nature. If we don't look after this, our whole marketing proposition, our whole tourism industry disappears. So we've got to find this balance between wilderness values and increasing tourism and the predictions of New Zealand going to 5.5 million tourists by 2025. So the thing that keeps me awake is this beast. This is the Alpine Fault. It's the second most active fault in the world in terms of movement. It's rocking along at about 3 centimetres a year. The issue for DOC is most of our tourism and most of our mountains are centred along the fault. Now, the failure will be catastrophic.
The whole plate motion is decelerating down through the Alps, but it's crashing and it's building up that elastic energy that then will pop on the Alpine Fault. And there's a map there showing you where the biggest amounts of deformation are, right red, right where we are. If you go and spend a night in the park, it's about the same chance of being influenced by a rock avalanche as you are of winning lotto. Luckily, that's actually a pretty low number. We can look at it and plot that up against the slopes, and where you've got more than 50 degrees, that's the loaded gun. Then the question is, what pulls the trigger? The thing that's really interesting is that if you plot up the numbers, it's exponentially growing. And you find that we have had more earthquakes, and the energy that's been released has been more in recent times, and you can fit that curve. So it's not necessarily just climate change. We've had a massive increase in rock avalanches, but they're occurring naturally. If you hit it with a big earthquake, what will that do? Well, it'll give the Alps a hell of a rattle and it'll knock a lot of them down. So, we need to think about our huts. In the past, we've been driven by the building code, and the building code says that you have to build a structure that will last for 50 years. That is not the right approach here. The landscape won't last for 50 years. What you need to do is to be able to build something with your investment so that you can move it if the landscape doesn't last. That has implications for how you treat the park.
Each year, more than 20,000 mountaineers try to reach the highest peaks of the Alps. Now I'd like to talk about the normal route of the Mont Blanc, which is shown by the yellow line. It's not a difficult route, but there are specific hazards concentrating on a short passage between the two refugees. From 1990 to 2011, 74 people died and 180 were injured along this route. Most are caused directly or indirectly by rockfalls. Every year, on average, 3 or 4 people die here, around 8 people are seriously injured, and 1,000 people are affected by rockfalls. Obviously, rising visitor numbers means more accidents. This Mont Blanc problem is a clear example of the problems that are caused when the people who make decisions about high mountain issues cannot reach consensus.
This is Franz Josef Glacier on the west coast, probably the best known glacier in New Zealand. And so even though the ice is moving really quickly, it's not quick enough. And so you can see the glaciers just thinning out as the ice melts. The melt rates here are about 20 metres a year. It's the highest melt rates measured anywhere in the world. This is Fox Glacier. Everything's going on here. The glacier is moving, it's retreating, the hillside's coming down. So things are changing really quickly. And we really want to know what's going to happen to these glaciers in the future. This is where it gets scary. And I know Simon that said that he was going to be the doomsayer. I think that's my job, because these glaciers are going to get really small. We have lost a lot of ice in the Southern Alps. We are going to lose a lot more. And whatever we do is going to make a big difference to these glaciers because they're so sensitive to temperature. So if the difference of half a degree for these glaciers is actually quite a lot.
It was at that time, that year, when I climbed Everest, that I noticed a lot of problems on the mountain. In particular, trash. I thought it was a damn shame that the most beautiful mountain in the world, at least for me, it had a really bad reputation for being also the dirtiest mountain. I had a big problem, which is I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in my pocket to launch a cleaning expedition. But what I did see at that time was a lot of Sherpas going up on the mountain, fixing up camps, dumping all their equipment, say tents or oxygen or whatever it may be, and then coming down empty, absolutely empty. And I thought that's a missed opportunity. So what I did was I started to approach all the different camps, all the Sherpas and also Western mountaineers, and I said, if you guys are coming down empty and you find trash on your way, if you can, put it in your backpack, bring it to me in base camp, we'll weigh it, and then I'll give you cash for it. So at the moment, we're still doing this, and I started this scheme in 2008. We call it the Cash for Trash. It's money spent that directly gets a result, rather than me spending money on putting a big team together who may or may not bring down trash. And this is a letter I got this year from the SPCC, who are the NGO that is responsible for cleaning Mount Everest. I'm very proud to say that until today, we have cleaned up more than 15,700 kilograms of garbage off of Mount Everest, and God knows how much human waste off of it.
The dilemma that was probably the hardest to solve, when you have greater numbers of people, you get the issues of human waste. And that's what I've probably spent 20 years trying to figure this thing out. You know, it's people have to go. And so what do we do about it? In the year 2000, I decided to see how hard it would be to bring off all of our climbers' waste that year. I needed to bring it off in something rather than a plastic bag. As you know, climbers have a lot of sharp points. And if you're hauling around big bags of your human waste, you're going to step on them, you're going to hit them with something sharp. It's just, and it's not going to be a good situation. We pretty much passed those out to climbers in the year 2001 to see if we could convince them to bring back their waste. And that year we were able to get, I think it was like 23 groups of people to try to bring back their waste. We even had people, even on hard climbs like Mount Huntington, that brought back all their waste, which was pretty cool. And it wasn't long before climbers everywhere wanted to use these cans. And today it's working out incredibly well. I would say over 90% of the waste is being brought out voluntarily from all the climbers that are going into all the peaks around the Alaska Range. Climbers are looking after each other, and when you have people doing this, they're convinced, if I'm doing it, then you have to be doing it. And they turn other climbers in that are not. And so it's amazing how well the system has worked.
Now, we mountain guides live in the mountains for up to 6 to 9 months a year. So it's always been very important to me that we as operators do what we can to minimise our impacts, both environmental and social. When I think about what factors make the mountain environment sustainable, I try to imagine what my grandchildren and their grandchildren might see when they visit the mountains in 10 or 50 years' time. So for me, in order to do my part to try and help out Nepal, I went to the Nepalese Ministry of Tourism in Kathmandu as I was departing to climb Dhaulagiri in 1998, and I suggested to them that I'd pack up all the rubbish that I knew to be there in Dhaulagiri Base Camp. All the Ministry of Tourism had to do was pay some contribution to the porters to carry the rubbish out and dispose of it properly once it did come out. Then we'd all be winners. They'd have a clean national park, and the porters would get paid a bonus to do the work. But their answer was no. It's not possible. Here I was handing them $10,000 for my permit fee, and they wouldn't commit a couple of $100 to protecting their own environment. I believe the defining factor that determines the quality of a region's sustainable practices is the governance that oversees them and the motivation of the local populace to uphold these practices.
This is the location of my study. It's located on the Kenai Lake. So I counted each pile of toilet paper. And there's a creek on one side, which for some reason people like to go right next to the creek. There was a toilet discovered. However, they didn't put anything underneath the toilet. And midway through the summer, apparently it reached a poo saturation point. And so folks moved it 6 feet over. To establish the control period versus the testing period, I did a big cleanup. I had 17 volunteers come and clean up 500 piles of feces. And then by September, the waste was again accumulating right near the popular campsites. In grand total, this is a map of everything. There were 695 piles of feces. So the norm activation theory states that in order for there to be a behavior change, people have to be aware of the consequences and ascribe responsibility to those consequences. And together they create a norm which creates a behavior. I found that people wanted to do the right thing, but they didn't know what the right thing was.
Our pristine waters come from our mountains, and so our mountains are our tupuna. They provide us with water, and we are water. So water is the utmost, and it sustains us, and it comes from our mountains. They're the essence of who we are. So looking after our lands, our waters, ourselves, we are guardians of all of those. And not just tangata whenua, Indigenous people, all of us. It's all of our responsibility to look after all of those realms. That's called kaitiakitanga, or being a guardian. So we're sort of asking, have we looked after our maunga? Who's going to take over? What are we going to leave them? What are they going to pick up? A mess? It's up to us to try and leave our environment in as pristine condition as we can, or improve it.
You can see sustainable construction requires increased efficiency. So in energy, water, building materials, you're looking at increasing your efficiency. It's about reducing impact on the environment and human health, and it's about doing that over the whole life cycle of the building. So probably the most sustainable building would be an igloo, right? So it is uses local building materials, zero transportation costs, recyclable building materials, durable materials, zero greenhouse gases to manufacture the building materials, zero environmental impact, easy to decommission, and affordable, but not very comfortable.
Everything lines up to destroy them. What level of risk should you design for? How long should it last? And what is your return period event? I've been in the mountains before, and they were very dangerous. You know, the media presents all of these dangers, you know, clearly quite serious. There were multiple different dangers. The primary one in New Zealand is wind. The accepted standard in New Zealand is that you would design for a 1 in 500 year wind event. So the other thing is the huts go flat out to destroy themselves faster than the external issues can destroy them. Everyone cooking, breathing in a cold hut. The inside of the hut is filled full of humid atmosphere. In the old huts like Tasman Saddle here, it goes straight through the wall linings until it gets to the place where it hits zero. It goes cold, and with cyclic freezing and thawing over the seasons, the hut basically just disintegrates from the inside out.
I always say Austria is not a country famous for national parks. Austria is famous for skiers, for musicians, for painters. Nowadays we have 6 national parks in Austria. The real great impact on this landscape concerning tourism in this area was the building of this high alpine road, Großglockner Hochalpenstraße. At that time the glacier went up to here. Nowadays you won't see anything from this glacier. These mountains are a little bit struggling. They are always in between, one hand conservation and on the other hand seeking a balance between conservation and development. Therefore, in the 90s a treaty has been signed, so-called Alpine Convention, which is quite an important political instrument to implement sustainability in this area, international treaty between the Alpine countries and the European Union. And the goal is, the objective is sustainable development concerning environmental, social, economic and cultural issues.
Let's not forget the joy of mountains, and we all love being in the hills. And you know, many of my friends in the last couple of days have said that they've sort of been brought to tears by the beauty of the mountains. So I get nervous about sort of talking about crises in the mountains, etc. And I don't think we do have a crisis. I think we have challenges and we have growth, but let's keep the enjoyment and love. There is a popularity around the world of being in mountain environments, and we are all part of that. We're going to have more visitors in New Zealand than New Zealanders pretty soon. That growth is going into the back country. So if you look at the numbers, the growth in the regions is greater than in the cities. So if we want to manage those places, we need money. We've got to be considering departure tax, and I'm a real advocate for it. I think we need to have time to sort out the solution. But I'm pleased that the discussions that we're having are landing up on the Minister of Tourism's desk and others to make sure that mountain activities and the management of our mountains gets a higher profile.
Our challenges in Nepal have been that we're stuck in a sort of low-end budget tourism trap. And the big issue in the mountains is the huge, completely overwhelming pressure on the Everest region. 80% of all climbers are climbing in that region. The objective of the Great Himalaya Trail was to try and spread tourism benefits east and west along the 1,700-kilometer route. Has the Great Himalayan Trail been successful? I think it's probably a bit too early to say. Last year, 15,000 people went to destinations that were not Everest and Annapurna or Langtang, so that's more than there used to be, 8% of all trekkers. So we're sort of heading in the right direction.
On the 2nd of December 2000, it was designated a World Heritage. We were very happy, we were very proud. Fast forward 10 years, I went around and had some discussion, some dialogue with the villagers. They're very unhappy. They said, we no longer want to be a World Heritage. I said, why? It's a major recognition. They said there are just so many people going visiting and climbing, and there's no opportunity for them to climb the mountain. It's supposed to be a sacred site, and they said it's just so full all the time and so expensive for them. They just cannot afford it. And what I did was we initiated the Kinabalu Community Day and Community Bazaar inside the park on 2nd December. It's very successful, and every year we have it now. On the 5th of June at 7:15, Kinabalu earthquake, which is 6 on the Richter scale earthquake, but it was devastating nonetheless. Not easy up there. So the Kinabalu restoration project, before starting the restoration process, we promised the people, we said Kinabalu will be back better than before. And we are back. Kinabalu is back better than before.
What sort of fired me up and got the started on this whole thing was this road up to the Remarkables. Now, everyone was allowed to go through except the general public. This was some of the work they were doing, and I was thinking, you know, we're just trashing the joint. You know, it's got this economic justification, but you're at the same time just telling me to go away. The public was getting a pretty raw deal out of it all. Someone needed to push back. I think the secret is the department needs to work with what I term connectors. And connectors are people like myself who can kind of push these issues into the public realm without the baggage of bureaucracy. There's a huge amount of energy behind wilderness. You know, in this group of people here, these are the people that'll have the energy to bring it forwards. And they're also the people we need to listen to.
One thing is certain, things are not going to remain the same. Let's keep up the momentum of the previous conferences about reducing impacts, reinforcing special values of mountain lands, and dealing with change. But let's also expand to focus on anticipating and controlling, and I use that word advisedly, mass tourism, and let's look harder at the role that mountain lands can play in social harmony and equity.